dollar, that's what I need. Hey, hey, well, I need a dollar, that's what I need. Hey, hey, said I need a dollar, that's what I need. And if I share with you my story, will you share your dollar with me? Bad times are coming, and I...
2 hairbrushes away from homelessness. 2 hairbrushes away from homelessness. Profiled for looking unhoused at night in a corporate stove. Walking, not talking, pants not hemmed, doubled up in pain, walking slowly so as not to shake up the rain in my humblest way, looking down, feeling blown, pretend PoLice following me. It was fast, can't even pinpoint why to be exact. "Can I help you?" came the patronizing PoLice command. "I just want some aspirin. I just need some aspirin, man," I whispered, barely able to see, speak, or stand. "What did you say?" came the command of hate again my way. For a moment, nothing was said. "If you aren't going to speak up, maybe you need to leave this Safeway." I backed up. I turned away. Maybe I really didn't need that aspirin anyway. Then to the counter. "What's your card number?" More gazes of anti-poor people hate barely allowed me to pay. After all, I could have been a run from the state. Barely got my meds. Profiled for not taking a hairbrush to my head. The war on the poor, alive and well in amerikkka, not dead. Yeah, this podcast from a poverty scholar is dedicated to all my fellow poverty, houseless, criminalized scholars trying to survive on these never public streets, in these corporate stores, cafes, parks, for sitting, standing, living, and basically being alive while unhoused and unsafe. Earlier that same day, after being profiled for being unhoused and houseless in Safeway, I went to a Peet's coffee shop in the gentrified streets of Oakland and witnessed yet another example of the PoLicing of poverty. And let me be clear, this ain't nothing new for me. Me and Mama used to got followed for DWP, driving while poor, violations in our hoopties, for sitting in the park while houseless, for sitting in cafes while looking houseless, all of those gray areas in full effect in my life. So it just brought me back to the not too distant past. But I was in the gentrified streets of North Oakland and in a Peet's coffee shop, and a unhoused brother got loud when they asked him to leave, which I probably would have done too. He got a little extra, saying, "Fuck off, get off of me." And in so doing, scared the customers. And eventually he left, but in the process, again, scared the customers. And at the end, somebody called the PoLice on him. Now, these are where the gray areas come up. And the privilege of privacy, and what I would call the mental health crisis in public. So those of us who are unhoused don't even have the privilege of privacy. We don't have 4 walls and a roof when we fall apart. Our crises, our sorrow, our depression, our anger is subject to public approval. We remain in the public, and of course we are criminalized members of the public, so we face arrest, incarceration. And in this brother's case, the PoLice were called, not 1 or 2, but 7 or 9. Within minutes they arrived and offered him the fabulous options: door number 1, county jail; door number 2, 5150. Maybe they could have offered him an apartment. Maybe then he'd been less pissed off. But the reality is that our sorrow, our tragedy, our anger is now a public display. And so feelings that you and I might have behind closed doors under a roof and then get over them are basically now up for public approval or disapproval. And so what happens is the PoLice are called, because people have equated those three numbers, 911, with comfort, safety, and taking care of something, right? And those other three numbers, 311. So, people think, oh, well, the person's having a crisis, I better help them, which leads to the cult of rehabilitation, which I've talked about in previous podcasts, and the idea, the savior industrial complex. But it also just leads to people thinking they're doing the right thing, right? But let me just throw this at you. What if someone came into your apartment that you didn't know, and when you were upset or crying about the loss of a loved one or a job or something else, screaming, hitting your pillow, and called the PoLice on you? Well, of course, this isn't so far from the truth. It oftentimes happens, which is why I'm bringing this up. It's a lot easier on the social justice tip to get behind the clean racial profiling of calling the PoLice on two normative young men of color, like in the Starsucks a few weeks back, by the light bright staff member. But what if the cop callers are people of color? In this case, in the Peet's case, it was a black middle-class customer and a black security guard, and the cop callee was a neurodivergent man of color or a white man. Once we start acting cray, somehow race doesn't seem to make such a big play. But the key part here is that class exists in these calls. It is definitely these normative ideas of what is civil, what is middle-class behavior, what is normal behavior, number one. And I take you back a few more weeks to the experience of myself and other unhoused and formerly unhoused people of all colors and all nations sitting on the porch in a very intentionally blighted poor people of color neighborhood in Philadelphia, and having the cops called on us for sitting on the porch while houseless, showing up and saying, where's your lease? And I was like, well, do they have a lease? Since when do you have to have a lease to sit on a porch? Oh, that's right, because we were loud. So again, these ghetto stereotypes, these ideas that are related specifically to poor people, and then the specific experience of being unhoused while neurodivergent, and the way in which, our emotions, our feelings, our experiences are exposed because we do not have the privilege of privacy. We do not have a roof and four walls. So these gray areas are why Poor Magazine, Prensa Pobre Familia, does the How to Not Call the PoLice Ever workshops, because this is the gray areas we live in and walk in. We refuse to engage with the people that test, arrest, incarcerate, and oftentimes kill us. And we constantly are in situations where we hurt each other because we are dealing with our trauma all the time. And we come out of all of these different spaces and places of trauma and pain. But similarly, it's a very important and serious thing, because in the case of these calls that are meant to help us, whether it be help our own fear about our response, our trigger response about somebody getting loud, or help the person who's getting loud, or arguably a little bit of both, we have to bring up the stories of Luis Demetrio Gongora Pat, who the cops were called because the person didn't know what to do about a houseless person in their neighborhood. So they didn't call 911, they called 311. And if people don't know, those numbers conflate and engage with the PoLice as well. So the 5150 calls are not guaranteed safety. What they are is oftentimes, again, lead to our criminalization or our death. In the case of Mayan brother, uncle, father, Luis Demetrio Gongora Pat Ibaye, who died because of that so-called helping call. So what I ask people is to look back at themselves, to think about if you're actually trying to help somebody in a mental health crisis, think about how you would feel. Thin out the question. Maybe not help them at all. Maybe help the neighbors who might call the cops on them. And similarly, if you're interested in standing with other housed residents, Poor Magazine is organizing a press conference of housed residents to respond to these politrickster threats of more sweeps like our bodies are trash, to stand with us and say, I am housed and I don't want my unhoused neighbors to be swept, to be incarcerated, or to be killed. So, yeah, those are 2 or 3 options. Our next upcoming workshop on how to not call the PoLice ever will be at the First Congregational Church in Oakland on July 15th. You can find the event on FaceCrack or on poormagazine.org, or go to the First Congregational Church website, or email us. You need to register at poormag@gmail.com. As well, if you're interested or willing to stand with us as housed neighbors of the whole Bay Area, demanding that the sweeps stop and that you don't want your unhoused neighbors to be swept, please also email us, poormag@gmail.com. And at the end of the day, thank you for being woke. Thank you for thinking through these things with us. And realize that if you've been told that the answer to all of your problems are those 3 little numbers for your whole life, it might take you a little while to unhinge yourself from that same idea. And so all respect and love in your ongoing liberation.